Moving into the realm of algebra. Algebra is really what happens when we start replacing some numbers with letters. Now, when we're doing this, the whole reason we do this is because sometimes these numbers are unknown and we want to still be able to talk about them. Sometimes these numbers are just kind of annoying to write out. So, for instance, a common one that we tend to write out when we're dealing with circles is pi, this number 3.141599265, whatever. It's just kind of annoying to write out, so instead of writing out this big long number there, we just write this little symbol and it means the same thing. So, there's a couple of nice things about writing it like that, a couple of nice reasons we do that. Alright, so in any case, when we're doing this, we want to be able to use the letter x to represent a variable, a number, instead of using it to represent multiplication. So we no longer use the letter x to represent multiplication at all. And if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that I don't really use the letter x even before this point. I just don't like getting into the habit of using the letter x to represent multiplication. I use dots, or if I'm on my keyboard, the typical thing is an asterisk. That's how we typically write multiplication on a keyboard. But when we're dealing with algebra, yeah, it's going to be a dot like this. So it's kind of like a period, but it's halfway between. Or you just write nothing at all. You do a parentheses b, or a in parentheses and a b, or two parentheses next to each other, or just the two variables next to each other. That means multiplication as well. So there's a bunch of different ways we can write multiplication, and by and large, multiplication is our default operation. So if we want to write something like 8 times a, we would just write 8a, or m times p, we'd write mp. 2 times s times t, we'd write 2st. 3 times x, well, we generally wouldn't write 3xx. That's kind of weird. Instead, what we'd usually do here is we'd say this is 3x squared. All right. As far as parentheses, parentheses, we don't change the way we write them at all, but we kind of start thinking of them as in a different way. So you use parentheses, or when you see them, you can think of this as one big number, and you can say that this is 2 times something. Similarly with brackets, brackets are the same thing as parentheses, only when we're using when we're doing multiple, like nested parentheses, we tend to switch back and forth between parentheses. You can see the parentheses here and the brackets here and here. You would never see something where you would have them nested improperly, where this bracket matches up with that bracket and that parentheses matches up with that one. It's always going to be properly nested, so you'll be able to say the parenthesis that begins here and ends here. Anything that's inside of it, if we open something up, it needs to be closed before we can close that other parenthesis. And this kind of lends itself towards this is a single number inside this larger expression. And you can see inside the parentheses we have 3x plus 5 times whatever this number was. And then the larger parentheses, we can think of that, we can kind of group that together and say, well, we're taking 2 times whatever that number is. So it's a way of encapsulating data. Encapsulating is the actual word that describes this process. Similarly here, we're taking a number minus a number. Yeah, I know there's all sorts of stuff going on there, but ultimately we're doing something minus something else, so you can see look at that and think of it as subtraction, because the subtraction is the last operation to take place. All right, division. Technically, you could write these little division symbols like this, but we don't really write them when we're dealing with when we're working in algebra. I'm not sure exactly the reason why. We tend to just write everything, all the division, as fractional, using the division bar, so in fractional form. We go out of our way to study some of the rules and some of the ways of simplifying when we're dealing with fractions, and the nice thing about all that stuff that we learned is it still applies, and well, it's just kind of easier to see what's going to cancel if you write it in the same way as you write it in this fractional form. Now when we're doing these division bars, you don't necessarily need parentheses around the top and the bottom to indicate that this division is going to take place after all those other operations. These two things are the same.